In this warm-up, we're going to be looking at standard deviation and variance. What I'd like you to do is try your warm-up and give it a couple minutes, and once you feel as you have the solutions and you feel confident, go ahead and continue playing this video for the solutions. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to calculate the math test scores for class 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and calculate math test scores for class number 2. Looking at class number 1, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my numbers, my data set, and I'm going to put it in my L1 column. I'm going to go ahead and calculate my statistics by pressing Stat, Calc, 1var Stat. And it looks like when I calculate this, I get a mean, or a mu, of about 78.6. For the purpose of this example, I am going to go ahead and round it. You'll see why in a moment. If I look down at my sigma, or in my calculator it says sigma x, I'm going to get 11.3, which for right now I'm going to go ahead and round it to 11. My variance is not found in my graphing calculator, so I actually have to go ahead and take my standard deviation and square it to give me my 121. Now, it says determine how many standard deviations each of the numbers are away from the mean. So I want to take a look at a bell curve for a moment. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a little sketch of a bell curve. And one piece of information I already know is my mean, which I'm going to say is about 79. Again, we rounded, but that's okay. Now I can see that my standard deviation is 11, which means that I'm going to go ahead and break it into my standard deviation pieces. If I add 11 to 79, I'm going to get 90. And if I add another 11 to 90, I'm going to get 101. Likewise, going in the other direction, if I subtract 11 from 79, I'm going to get 68. And if I subtract another 11 from 68, I'm going to get 57. So each of these pieces that you see in red represents a standard deviation. Okay, again, we talked about standard deviations above and below. I'm going to signify it as +1, +2, and +3. And then -1, -2, -3 standard deviations. So my question being asked is, how many standard deviations away from the mean is the score of 70? Well, if I look at my numbers, it looks like 70 lies between 68 and 79. So this is one standard deviation below, or you can actually say it like this, one below. If I look at 92, 92 ends up between 90 and 101, which is in my +2 standard deviations, or 2 above the mean. And my 82 is going to be in between my 79 and 90, which is +1 standard deviations above the mean, or just 1 above. Now let's take a look at this class scores for class number 2. This time I have a different set of data, a different set of test scores, and it looks like I have a mean of about 87, a standard deviation of about 4, and a variance of about 16 once I square that standard deviation. I'm going to ask myself those same questions now. I'm just going to draw myself a little bell curve so I can see all these standard deviations represented. I'm going to put my mean, and then I'm going to go ahead and divide it into my standard deviations. Now my standard deviation this time is 4, much smaller than class set 1. So each time I'm going to be adding 4. And if I do that, here are the numbers that I get. Okay, now I want to answer my questions. How many standard deviations away from the mean is a score of 84? If I look at my 84, it lies between my 83 and 87, which is 1 standard deviation below the mean. If I look at a score of 94, it looks like 94 lies between 91 and 95, which is 2 standard deviations above the mean. And my 80 sits between my 79 and 83, which is 2 below, which is -2 or 2 below. Now my next question is, which data set has greater variability? Again, variability just means spread. Which one is more spread out? Well, we can look at that by looking at our standard deviation and variance. In our first class, our standard deviation was 11 and our variance was 121. I'm going to write those down. In our second class, our standard deviation was 4 and our variance was 16. Obviously, you can see that our class number 1 had a much higher standard deviation and variance, which means that this data set has the most variability or spread.